Welcome to Craziest HOA Moments. Keep your phone ready for this one. The contractor set a fence panel down and Barbara stormed in shouting "Stop work right now," or she was calling it an unapproved build. I looked at her, then at my phone already recording, and said, "Smile, I am documenting this for the file." Her face went from red to purple in about 2 seconds. The contractor, a guy named Mike with 30 years of fence work under his belt, just stood there holding his post-hole digger like he had seen this movie before. Barbara stepped right up to the property line, waving a coffee tumbler in one hand like she was conducting an orchestra of rage, and announced that my fence violated 3 separate sections of the Millstone Fence Compliance Association guidelines. I asked her which sections. She pulled out a folded rule packet in a plastic sleeve from her blazer pocket and started reading off numbers without actually showing me the pages. I work as an insurance claims adjuster, so I document everything, and I knew this was going to be a problem the second she refused to let me see the text she was quoting. Mike looked at me and asked if we should keep going. I told him yes. Barbara screamed that she would fine me daily until I gave up and cried. That line right there was the first big mistake she made, because I recorded it, and it was going to come back to haunt her in a way she never saw coming. Let me back up just a little. I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in a neighborhood where a missing survey stake turns into a neighborhood scandal. The Millstone Fence Compliance Association is one of those HOAs that treats every property decision like a federal crime. I bought my house 2 years ago, and the back fence was already rotting when I moved in. I ignored it for a while because I was busy with work, but after a section collapsed during a storm last winter, I knew I had to replace it. I pulled my original purchase documents, found the survey, checked the HOA architectural guidelines 3 times, and submitted a request in March. I got an approval letter in April signed by the management company regional supervisor stating that my fence design, height, and placement were all compliant. I kept a copy in my truck, another copy in my file cabinet, and a digital scan in 3 different cloud folders. I am that guy. I knew the HOA had a reputation for changing their minds after the fact, so I prepared. Barbara Clark is the Architectural Committee Chair, which means she gets to approve or deny every exterior change anyone wants to make. She has gray hair and a sleek low ponytail, and she always wears a blazer like she is on her way to a corporate board meeting, even when she is just walking her dog. She carries a coffee tumbler everywhere, but I have never seen her actually drink from it. It is a prop. She uses it to gesture, to point, to slam on tables during meetings. And she has a plastic ruler that she keeps in her blazer pocket, the kind you get free from a hardware store, and she uses it to measure fence gaps, setbacks, and height violations like she is conducting a scientific experiment. The first time I saw her pull it out, I thought it was a joke. It was not a joke. Barbara takes the rules seriously, but only when she is the one enforcing them. If you are on her good side, your violations do not exist. If you are not, she will find something wrong with the color of your mailbox. I hired Mike and his crew in early September. The plan was simple: pull the old fence, set new posts, install panels, add a gate. Standard job. I gave Mike a copy of my approval letter, and he confirmed that everything I wanted was legal and matched the county codes. We scheduled the work for a Thursday and Friday, 2 full days. Thursday morning, Mike showed up at 8 with his crew and a truck full of lumber. I was home because I had taken the day off to oversee things. I stood in my backyard with a work glove tucked in one hand, wearing my black hoodie and a gray baseball cap, watching them mark the post locations with spray paint. No readable text, just small orange dots in the grass to show where the auger would go. The old fence came down fast. By 9:30, we had a pile of rotting wood stacked near the curb and a clear line of bare ground where the new fence would go. That is when Barbara showed up. I heard her voice before I saw her, a sharp, high-pitched shout cutting through the sound of the auger. She came around the side of my house without asking, walked right into my backyard, and started yelling at Mike to stop work immediately. Mike killed the auger and looked at me. I asked Barbara what the problem was. She said the fence was unapproved and that I was in violation of at least 3 guidelines. I pulled out my phone, opened the approval letter, and showed it to her. She barely glanced at it. She said the approval was invalid because the management company representative who signed it did not have authority and that the architectural committee, meaning her, had final say. I asked her to show me where that was written. She pulled out the folded rule packet, flipped through it without letting me see, and read off a section number. I asked to see the actual page. She refused. She said she did not have to prove anything to me and that I had 24 hours to stop work and submit a new request or she would start fining me. I asked how much. She said $500 a day. Mike asked if I wanted him to keep going. I looked at Barbara, then at the approval letter on my phone, then back at Mike. I told him yes. Barbara lost it. She screamed that I was making the biggest mistake of my life, that she had all day and so did her fine meter, and that she was going to make sure I regretted every single post I put in the ground. Then she pulled out her phone and took about 20 photos of the site, the lumber, the crew, and me. I stood there and let her. I did not say anything. I kept my hands open and my voice calm, because the real move was still ahead. Barbara left, but she came back an hour later with a security guard from the clubhouse. The guard, a middle-aged guy who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, hovered near the edge of my property and asked if there was a problem. I explained the situation. I showed him my approval letter. He said he was just there to observe and that he could not make me stop. Barbara demanded that he cite me for a violation. He said that was not his job. She threatened to report him to the management company. He shrugged. Barbara stood there fuming for another 10 minutes, taking more photos, measuring random things with her plastic ruler, and muttering about compliance audits. Then she left again. By noon, we had 4 posts set in concrete. Mike said the concrete needed to cure overnight, so we would finish the panels on Friday. I thanked him and went inside. My phone was already blowing up with emails. The first one was from Barbara, sent to me and copied to the entire board, the management company, and about 15 neighbors. The subject line was unapproved construction in progress, and the body was 3 paragraphs of accusations, rule citations, and threats. She claimed I had ignored the approval process, that my contractor was unlicensed, which was false, and that I was endangering neighborhood property values. She attached photos of my backyard with red circles drawn around the post holes, like they were crime scenes. I forwarded the email to my ally, a community manager from another HOA named Rachel, who I had met at a neighborhood meeting 6 months earlier. Rachel had 20 years of experience dealing with HOA drama, and she had already told me that Barbara was known across multiple associations as someone who bent rules to fit her agenda. Rachel called me within 10 minutes. She said the email was full of procedural errors and that Barbara had no authority to override a management company approval without a board vote. She told me to document everything and not to engage directly with Barbara in writing. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more wild HOA drama. That night I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the concrete curing in the backyard and Barbara showing up again in the morning with some new threat. I got up at 6 and made coffee. By 7, Mike and his crew were back. The posts had cured perfectly. We started installing the panels. The first panel went up smooth. The second panel was halfway installed when Barbara appeared again. This time she had a clipboard and a tape measure, not her plastic ruler. She marched up to the fence line and demanded that we stop. I asked why. She said the setback was wrong. I asked her to show me the measurement. She refused. She said she had already measured it and that I was 6 inches over the line. I asked where the survey stake was. She pointed to a spot in the grass about 3 feet from where my survey showed the actual line. I told her that was not the property line. She said it was and that she had a neighbor who agreed with her. That neighbor, it turned out, was someone who had been measuring from the wrong point and spreading bad math like it was gospel. I pulled out my survey, showed it to Mike, and we confirmed that our posts were exactly where they should be. Barbara said surveys could be wrong. I told her to hire her own surveyor if she wanted to challenge mine. She said she did not need to, because she was right. Mike installed the third panel. Barbara took more photos. She measured the height of the installed panels with her tape measure and announced that they were 2 inches too tall. I asked her to show me the guidelines. She pulled out the folded rule packet again and read a section that said fences could not exceed 6 feet. I told her my fence was exactly 6 feet. She said she measured 6 feet 2 inches. I grabbed a level and measured it myself. 6 feet. Mike measured it. 6 feet. Barbara insisted her measurement was correct. I asked if she was measuring from the ground or from the footer. She did not answer. I asked again. She said it did not matter. I told her it absolutely mattered because if she was measuring from the footer, which was 2 inches below grade, then of course it would read 2 inches higher. She said I was twisting the rules. I said I was following the rules exactly as written. She said she was going to file an emergency hearing request with the board and have my fence removed by force if necessary. The drizzle picked up. We all moved under the eave of my back porch to stay dry. Barbara refused to leave. She stood there in her blue blazer, hood up, clutching her coffee tumbler and her clipboard, glaring at me like I had personally insulted her. I asked her why she was doing this. She said it was her job to protect the neighborhood. I asked her why she had not fined anyone else for fence violations. She said there were no other violations. I told her I had photos of at least 4 fences in the neighborhood that were taller than mine, older than mine, and clearly not compliant with the guidelines. She said those were grandfathered in. I asked to see the documentation proving they were grandfathered. She said she did not have to show me anything. By 3 in the afternoon, we had the entire fence installed except for the gate. Mike said he would come back Saturday to hang the gate because the hardware had not arrived yet. I paid him for the work so far and thanked him. As soon as his truck pulled away, Barbara walked up to the fence and inspected every single panel with her plastic ruler. She measured the gaps between pickets. She measured the height again. She took more photos. Then she handed me a piece of paper. It was a notice of violation, printed on HOA letterhead, dated that same day, stating that I had installed an unapproved structure and that I owed $500 immediately, with an additional $500 per day until the fence was removed or brought into compliance. I asked what compliance meant. She said the architectural committee would decide. I asked when the committee would meet. She said they met once a month and the next meeting was not for 3 weeks. I asked if I was supposed to just pay $15,000 in fines while waiting for a meeting. She smiled and said maybe I should have thought about that before ignoring the rules. I went inside and called Rachel. She told me to file a formal dispute with the management company immediately and to request a hearing. She also told me to start gathering evidence. I spent the next 2 hours going through the neighborhood with my phone, taking photos of every fence I could find. I found 6 fences that were taller than mine. I found 3 fences that were closer to the property line than mine. I found 2 fences that were completely different styles from the approved guidelines. I found 1 fence that was literally leaning at a 15-degree angle and looked like it was going to fall over in the next strong wind. None of them had violation notices. None of them had fines. I compiled everything into a single document with side-by-side comparisons, measurements, and timestamps. That was my evidence. It was not enough to win by itself, but it was a start. Saturday morning, Mike came back to install the gate. Barbara was already waiting. She stood at the edge of my property with her arms crossed, watching every move Mike made. When he started drilling the hinge mounts, she stepped forward and said the gate was in the wrong location. I asked her what she meant. She said the gate had to be centered on the fence line. I showed her my site plan, which clearly indicated the gate location. She said the site plan was wrong. I asked her to show me the guideline requiring center placement. She could not. She said it was common sense. I told her common sense was not a rule. She said she was adding it to the list of violations. Mike finished the gate in about an hour. It swung smooth, latched clean, and looked great. Barbara took more photos and left without saying anything. That afternoon, I got another email. This one was a certified letter scanned and sent digitally, demanding payment of $1,000 within 7 days, or the HOA would place a lien on my property. The letter referenced the 2 violation notices and added a late fee for non-payment of the first fine, even though the first fine had only been issued the day before. I called the management company. The representative I spoke to, a woman named Linda, said she could not discuss the matter because it was under committee review. I asked when the review would happen. She said she did not know. I asked if I could pay under protest. She said the HOA was not currently accepting payments for this account because they were waiting for the committee decision. I asked how I was supposed to avoid late fees if they would not let me pay. She said that was not her problem. I called Rachel again. She laughed, but it was not a happy laugh. She said refusing to accept payment and then charging late fees was one of the oldest HOA scams in the book. She told me to document the refusal in writing and to send a certified letter to the management company and the board stating that I had attempted to pay and been refused. She also told me to request a formal hearing in writing and to cite the specific state procedures that required the HOA to provide one. I did all of that. I sent the letter Monday morning via certified mail with return receipt. I also emailed a copy to every board member I could find an address for, including Barbara. Barbara responded within an hour. Her email said that my request was denied because I had failed to comply with the initial violation notice. She said the hearing process was only available to homeowners in good standing, and since I owed fines, I was not in good standing. I forwarded the email to Rachel. Rachel said that was illegal and that the state procedure complaint process would force the HOA to respond. She told me to file a complaint with the state ombudsman, which I did that same afternoon. The complaint form asked for a detailed description of the issue, copies of all correspondence, and proof of harm. I attached everything: the approval letter, the violation notices, the certified letter refusal, the email denying my hearing request, and my comparison photos of other fences. I submitted it and got an automated reply saying I would hear back within 30 days. 30 days felt like forever, but I did not have a choice. In the meantime, Barbara escalated. She sent a vendor to my house unannounced, claiming the gate latch was a safety hazard. The vendor showed up Tuesday morning with a work order saying he was there to replace the latch. I asked who authorized the work. He said the HOA did. I asked to see the authorization. He showed me a printed email from Barbara with no signature or official letterhead. I told him I did not authorize any work on my property, and that if he touched my gate, I would call the police. He left. I called the management company and filed a formal complaint. Linda said she would look into it. She never called back. Wednesday, Barbara organized a neighborhood meeting at the clubhouse. The agenda, posted on the community board, said the meeting was about fence compliance and safety. I showed up. So did about 20 other homeowners, including Rachel, who drove over from her own neighborhood to support me. Barbara stood at the front of the room with her clipboard, her coffee tumbler, and a poster board covered in photos of my fence. No readable text, just images with red circles and arrows pointing to various features. She opened by saying that unapproved construction was a threat to property values and that the board needed to take immediate action. She did not mention me by name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. Rachel raised her hand and asked if the fence in question had been approved by the management company. Barbara said the management company approval was invalid. Rachel asked on what grounds. Barbara said the architectural committee had final authority. Rachel asked to see the section of the bylaws that said that. Barbara flipped through her rule packet and read a section about committee oversight. Rachel asked if that section specifically overrode management company approvals. Barbara said it did. Rachel asked her to point to the language. Barbara could not. The room got quiet. Another homeowner, a guy named Tom who lived 3 houses down from me, stood up and said his fence was taller than mine and he had never been fined. Barbara said his fence was grandfathered. Tom said he installed it 2 years ago. Barbara said the rules had changed since then. Tom asked when. Barbara said she did not have the date in front of her. Another homeowner pointed out that her fence was clearly not compliant with the stated setback rules, and she had also never been fined. Barbara said that was different. Rachel asked how. Barbara said the meeting was not about other fences, it was about the current violation. I stood up and said I wanted to show something. I pulled out my phone, connected it to the projector in the room, and displayed my comparison document. I went through each photo showing fences that were taller, closer, older, or less compliant than mine. I showed the violation notices I had received and pointed out that none of the other homeowners had received similar notices. I asked Barbara why. She said I was wasting everyone's time. I asked again. She said the other fences were not currently under review. I asked why mine was. She said someone had filed a complaint. I asked who. She refused to say. Rachel stood up and said that if the complaint was from Barbara herself, that was a conflict of interest, and the review should be handled by a neutral party. Barbara said there was no conflict. Rachel asked if Barbara had filed the complaint. Barbara said that was confidential. Tom laughed and said it was obvious Barbara had filed it. Several other homeowners agreed. The meeting fell apart. People started talking over each other, some defending me, some defending Barbara, most just confused about what the actual rules were. Barbara tried to call for order, but nobody listened. She finally said the meeting was over and stormed out, taking her poster board with her. I left the meeting feeling better, but also knowing Barbara was not going to let this go. She proved me right the next day. Thursday morning, I got a notice on my door saying the HOA had scheduled an emergency board meeting for Friday evening to vote on my fence removal. The notice said I could attend but not speak unless the board invited me to. I called Rachel and asked if that was legal. She said it depended on the bylaws, but it was definitely shady. She told me to bring my documentation and to be ready to make my case if they gave me the chance. She also said she would come with me as a witness. Friday evening, I showed up at the clubhouse with Rachel and every document I had. The board meeting was in a small conference room. 5 board members were there, including Barbara. The HOA president, a retired guy named Ed, sat at the head of the table. He looked uncomfortable. The meeting started with routine business, then moved to my fence. Barbara presented her case first. She said I had violated multiple guidelines, ignored the approval process, and refused to comply with violation notices. She showed photos of my fence and claimed the height, setback, and gate location were all wrong. She said the architectural committee had voted to require removal, and she was asking the board to enforce that decision. Ed asked if I had anything to say. I said I did. I stood up, laid out my approval letter, my survey, my site plan, and my comparison photos. I explained that I had followed every step of the approval process, that my fence met all the guidelines, and that the only reason I was being targeted was because Barbara had decided to interpret the rules differently for me than for anyone else in the neighborhood. I pointed to the comparison photos and asked why those homeowners were not being fined. Barbara said those cases were not relevant. I said they were absolutely relevant because they proved selective enforcement. Ed asked Barbara if the architectural committee had reviewed the other fences. Barbara said no. Ed asked why not. Barbara said there had been no complaints. Ed asked if she had filed the complaint against me. Barbara hesitated, then said yes. Ed sighed. Rachel stood up and said she had a question. She asked Barbara if the approval letter I had received from the management company was still in effect. Barbara said no. Rachel asked who had revoked it. Barbara said the architectural committee. Rachel asked when. Barbara said the committee had voted on it 2 weeks ago. Rachel asked if that vote had been documented and communicated to me. Barbara said it had been communicated through the violation notices. Rachel said that was not proper procedure and that the state required written notice of any approval revocation with an opportunity to appeal. She asked if Barbara had sent that notice. Barbara said the violation notice was the notice. Rachel said that was not the same thing. Ed looked at the other board members and asked if anyone had known about the revocation vote. Nobody had. Ed asked Barbara why the board had not been informed. Barbara said it was a committee matter. Ed said committees could not override management company approvals without board authorization. Barbara argued. Ed cut her off and said the meeting was moving on. The board voted 4-1 in my favor. Barbara was the only vote against. Ed said the violation notices were rescinded and that I owed no fines. He also said the board would be reviewing the architectural committee procedures to ensure compliance with state law. Barbara said the board did not have the authority to override the committee. Ed said the board absolutely had that authority, and that if she disagreed, she could file a formal complaint. Barbara stood up and left the meeting. I thanked Ed and the other board members and went home. I thought it was over. It was not over. The next morning, I got a call from Mike. He said someone had filed a complaint with the county building department claiming my fence was unpermitted. The county sent an inspector out Monday. The inspector looked at the fence, checked the setback, measured the height, and asked for my survey. I showed him everything. He said the fence was fine and that the complaint was baseless. He asked if I knew who had filed it. I said I had a pretty good idea. He said he could not tell me, but he did say that filing false complaints was a misdemeanor. I asked if he was going to pursue it. He said he did not have time, but that I could file a police report if I wanted. I did. The police took my report and said they would follow up. I never heard back, but the complaint triggered something else. The county inspector filed his report and the management company regional supervisor saw it. She called me directly, introduced herself as Susan, and asked what was going on. I told her the whole story. She said she had reviewed my file and that my approval was still valid and had never been revoked. She said Barbara did not have the authority to revoke it, and that the architectural committee had never held a vote on it. She said Barbara had been acting outside her role and that the management company was going to address it. I asked what that meant. Susan said she could not discuss personnel matters, but that I should not expect any further issues from Barbara. 2 days later, the twist happened. I got a call from Mike. He said one of his crew members had something to tell me. The crew member, a young guy named Danny, said Barbara had approached him after the first day of work and offered him $200 to take photos of the fence at specific angles that would make it look taller or closer to the property line than it actually was. Danny said he refused, but Barbara told him to at least stage a few shots where the fence panels were leaning before they were fully secured. Danny said he did not do it, but he was worried someone else might have. He said Barbara had also asked him if Mike was licensed and if the crew had insurance, and when Danny said yes to both, Barbara seemed disappointed. I asked Danny if he would be willing to repeat that in writing. He said yes. I drafted a statement, Danny signed it, and I sent it to Susan at the management company. Susan called me the next day. She said the management company was conducting an internal review and that Barbara had been placed on administrative leave from the architectural committee pending the outcome. She also said the board was scheduling a special meeting to review committee procedures and that I was welcome to attend. I said I would be there. The meeting happened the following week. Barbara did not show up. Ed opened the meeting by saying the board had received multiple complaints about selective enforcement and procedural violations within the architectural committee. He said the board was implementing new rules requiring all committee decisions to be documented, all violation notices to include specific guideline citations and photographic evidence, and all fines to be approved by the full board before being issued. He also said the committee would be required to conduct quarterly audits of neighborhood compliance to ensure even enforcement. Rachel stood up and suggested the board also implement a neutral appeal process where homeowners could challenge committee decisions without going through the committee itself. Ed agreed and said the board would work with the management company to create that process. The meeting wrapped up, and I went home feeling like I had actually won something. But I still did not have my trump card reveal yet. That came 2 weeks later when the management portal finally came back online after a scheduled maintenance outage. I had been trying to upload the signed statement from Danny, but the portal had been down for 3 days. The timing was critical because I had to deliver paper proof to Susan in person that same day to meet a deadline for the state procedure complaint response. I drove to the management company office with everything printed and organized in a folder. Susan was not there. Her assistant said she was at a regional meeting and would not be back until late afternoon. I asked if I could leave the documents. The assistant said I could, but they would not be reviewed until Susan returned. I needed them reviewed immediately because the state deadline was that evening. I sat in the lobby and waited. An hour later, Susan walked in. She looked surprised to see me. I explained the situation and handed her the folder. She flipped through it, then looked up at me and asked if I had sent this to anyone else. I said no. She said that was good because what I had was evidence of ethics violations and possibly fraud. She said Barbara had not only lied about the committee vote, but had also falsified documentation to support her claims. Susan said the management company was terminating Barbara's role on the architectural committee immediately and that the board would be notified. She also said the HOA was going to issue a formal apology and rescind all fines and notices related to my fence. I asked what would happen to Barbara. Susan said that was between Barbara and the board, but that she would no longer have any enforcement authority. The next day, I got an email from Ed. He said the board had held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Barbara from the architectural committee. He said the board was also implementing the new procedures Rachel had suggested, and that the HOA would be conducting a full audit of all outstanding violations to ensure fair enforcement. He apologized for the trouble and said the HOA was committed to doing better. I appreciated the apology, but I was not done yet. I still had the state procedure complaint pending, and I wanted to make sure the HOA could not do this to anyone else. The state ombudsman responded 3 weeks later. The response letter said the HOA had violated multiple procedural requirements, including failure to provide proper notice, failure to allow an appeal process, and selective enforcement of rules. The letter ordered the HOA to freeze enforcement pending a policy rewrite, implement a neutral appeal process, and provide restitution to any homeowner who had been fined under the old procedures. The letter also said the HOA had to submit a compliance plan within 60 days or face state sanctions. I forwarded the letter to Ed. He called me and said the board was already working on the compliance plan and that they appreciated my patience. He also said Barbara had resigned from the HOA entirely and that she was no longer living in the neighborhood. I did not ask where she went. I did not care. But the best part, the funniest karma moment, happened at a neighborhood potluck 2 months later. Someone brought up the fence drama, and one of the older homeowners said Barbara had always claimed nobody ever complains about the HOA. Another homeowner laughed and said that was funny, because she had just found a box in the clubhouse storage room labeled committee correspondence. Inside were dozens of letters and emails from homeowners over the past 5 years, all complaining about selective enforcement, unclear rules, and Barbara specifically. Nobody had ever seen them because Barbara had hidden them. The homeowner brought the box to the potluck and dumped it on a table. People started reading through the complaints. It was like a greatest hits of HOA dysfunction. Barbara had been sitting on a stack of evidence against herself for years, and now it was all out in the open. Someone said it was like she had built her own gallows and then handed everyone the rope. The HOA rewrote the architectural guidelines over the next 6 months. The new version was shorter, clearer, and included specific measurements, diagrams, and examples. The board also created a committee oversight policy that required all decisions to be documented in public meeting minutes and all violation notices to be reviewed by the full board before being issued. The appeal process allowed homeowners to request a hearing within 15 days of any notice, and hearings were required to be held within 30 days. The policy also banned committee members from filing complaints about specific properties unless they recused themselves from the review process. It was not perfect, but it was a lot better than what we had before. I kept my fence. It is still standing, still compliant, still the exact same height and setback it was the day Mike installed it. The gate still swings smooth. The latch still works. Every time I walk through it, I think about Barbara standing in my backyard with her coffee tumbler and her plastic ruler, convinced she was going to make me tear it all down. I think about the look on her face when Ed told her the board was overriding her decision. I think about Danny signing that statement and blowing the whole thing open. I think about the box of hidden complaints sitting in the clubhouse storage room, just waiting to be found. The neighborhood is quieter now. The new architectural committee chair is a retired engineer named Paula, who actually reads the guidelines before making decisions. The management company sends quarterly reports to all homeowners summarizing committee activity, and the board posts meeting minutes online within a week of every meeting. People are not afraid to ask questions anymore. The HOA is not perfect, but it is not a weapon anymore either. I still work as an insurance claims adjuster. I still document everything. I still keep copies in 3 places. I learned that lesson long before I bought this house, but Barbara reinforced it in a way I will never forget. If you are in an HOA, my advice is simple: read the guidelines, keep your receipts, and do not assume anyone is acting in good faith. And if someone shows up with a plastic ruler and a coffee tumbler and starts threatening daily fines, record everything, because that is the moment you know you are dealing with someone who thinks the rules are a weapon, not a framework. And when you have proof, when you have documentation, when you have witnesses, do not show your hand too early. Keep your voice calm, keep your evidence organized, and wait for the moment when it matters most. Because that is when you win. Barbara lost her committee role immediately. The HOA froze enforcement pending a policy rewrite. And I got my fence, my peace of mind, and a story I will be telling for years. Until next time, take care, and stay safe out there.